You brought up the Tea Party and the whole venom that came during that campaign, and you received quite a bit of that in your district. I went to a few of your forums, one in Ridgefield that was a little out of control in my opinion, one in Norwalk that Bob Adams recorded that was a little extreme. But although you went through all that stuff and you and Congressman Murphy had your fair share of these people on the extreme right that definitely voiced their opinion, you were able to win re-election relatively okay. And what does that say about, what do you take from that, the results of that election?
Both Chris Murphy and I inhabit swing districts, moderate districts. There's extreme right and extreme left. They're very vocal and they show up at town hall meetings. And there became a little bit of a statewide caravan where some of the Tea Partiers would go around and show up at the usual things, and I'm blessed with an educated, thoughtful constituency that is pretty center of the road, and so the Tea Partiers who were raising hell in the town hall meetings didn't represent anywhere close to a majority of even the Republican electorate in this district. And I'm not, different districts will be different, but they're very vocal and they're very influential in primaries. I mean, how do you explain Christine O'Donnell being the Republican nominee in what is a relatively moderate, northeastern state, right? You just have intensity can affect primaries, but at the end of the day, on election day, most people show up somewhere between the 45 and 55-yard line.
That's not the first time you've referred to the extreme right and extreme left, but is that fair to equate them as possibly somebody who might be considered an extreme left? Is it fair to equate the way the right approaches things and the way the left does these days?
That's not what I did, John. I don't think you heard anything I said as being equating. I simply said that they exist.
Well, you said they show up at meetings and
in equal numbers. No, I didn't say that.
No.
Look, people who are, political activists do tend to show up at meetings, rather than watch TV. And I'm not equating them in any way. I'm just saying they exist and they tend to show up at political events more than certainly the disinterested center, but even the interested center.
I think one of the problems that I had with many of the meetings that I attended with you and Congressman Murphy is that, you had coordinated efforts to disrupt your meetings.
Yeah.
And that really took away from the constituents that you represent asking you serious questions and thoughtful questions. Instead, you had people from like the 2nd District and the 1st District coming over, Bob McGuffey with his memos telling how to disrupt meetings, and it turned things into a freak show. And I don't think that really served your constituents. I know it didn't serve me when I went to see Congressman Murphy up in Simsbury and I almost got attacked. And I hopefully as we move forward we won't see that type of venom that we saw last year.
And you don't see any of that ferocity.
But
on
I'm not really hopeful about that. But I just want to get your thoughts on that, because I heard a lot of feedback from people who were just very upset, especially in Ridgefield. A couple of times that I attended your meetings up there, regular people just said, I can't believe these guys just made a mockery out of this whole thing and just took over these meetings.
Yeah. Yeah, I always drew a distinction between people who were very emotional and angry. Fine, Americans have a right to be very angry about where we are today, and those who systematically seek to devalue the process, the discussion, and Bob McGuffey's deal, sending out a memo on here's how you disrupt it. How does that serve our democracy? I have no problem with somebody disagreeing with everything I stand for and being very emotional about the way they express that, but to somehow try to cow elected officials, to delegitimize them after they've won an election, and to try to squelch people who are maybe a little less aggressive in that context is really awful. And unfortunately we had that. We had the propagation of just outright misinformation, death panels, you know, the phraseology that the opposition to the healthcare reform used to describe the healthcare reform, the job-killing government takeover of healthcare. None of those words is substantiated by the evidence, right?
But it's stuck.
But it, and
Viagra
that,
for convicts. You know, that was a good one.
Yeah, it's and look, there were moments when I was nervous. I mean, there were people who were so emotional that it appeared that they, you know, might, you know, and while I'm not sure that there's a spectrum between anger and emotion and a descent into violence, you know, I just got something in the mail the other day from Freedom Watch, you know, calling for a Second Amendment overthrow of the government. I mean, that's out of line. That's out of line because we'll all be unhappy with the outcome of the process, but we have a process that we should all respect, and to, you know, imply violence or that's a real assault on the system.